choke somebody to death requires a great deal of intent.
An innocent victim.
She was very much a social butterfly, and everybody knew her.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
Love triangles are powder kegs. They are very unstable.
We said, hey, we think she's dead. Did you kill her?
If she's telling him it's over, he really has nothing to lose financially by killing her.
The truth will be revealed.
Boom, this is the guy who did it. Now we just have to prove it.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Anna Maria Island, a 7-mile strip of soft white sand in the Gulf Coast of Florida.
What's unique about Anna Maria Island is it's just naturally beautiful. It's got wide beaches, soft sand. It does attract a lot of tourists, but the community's been able to stay free of corporate tourism. It has that old Florida feel where the buildings are still low to the ground. There's not major signage everywhere, so it's really a gem.
The criminal activity of Anna Maria Island relative to the rest of Manatee County is pretty low. Murders are extremely rare.
It's early morning, November 2008. 2 patrol deputies pull over a white convertible for a broken taillight. But when they approach the car, the driver takes off running.
First thing that pops into their head is probably a stolen car. So the first person you go after is the driver.
The deputies give chase and eventually apprehend Robert Corona, a 2-bit criminal known to local police.
He's a car thief, and he had several convictions for that type of offense. However, he did not have any violent convictions.
When we first talked to him, he said, oh, he met this woman and a man in the Gator Lounge bar, and they wanted some crack. So she loaned me her car to go get it. And not having the whole story, we said, oh, okay.
When investigators run the license plate of the convertible, they see it belongs to 49-year-old hotelier Sabina Muehlbauer.
Sabina is a native German, and she was in the tourism business there, and so she came to Anna Maria and fell in love with it. She was very much a social butterfly, and sort of everybody knew her. She met her husband, Tom, and they decided to buy a hotel together, which turned out to be Haley's Motel, a nice little popular spot that people really loved.
So I came out to Haley's Motel where Sabine lived with her husband to make notification that her car had been impounded. And I said, well, it was impounded in East Bradenton off 14th Street.
Bradenton is just 9 miles east of Anna Maria Island, but in every way that matters, it's a world apart.
The area is not the best part of town. There is a certain amount of street crime that occurs there.
Her husband, Tom, says that she doesn't go there, she doesn't drink, she doesn't smoke, she doesn't do anything like that. She was not out there. There's prostitutes and bars, and she had no interest in either.
This is so out of line for her. I mean, she is a straight and narrow, definitely was not on drugs.
Would she lend that vehicle to anybody?
Never. She wouldn't let me drive it.
Tom says he hadn't seen Sabina in 2 days.
Tom advised us that they were estranged. They had been estranged for quite a while, and that she was living mostly half a mile away at her boyfriend's apartment, Bill Cumber.
Tom directs investigators to Bill's apartment, but Sabina isn't there either.
When we went to Cumber's residence and was talking to him, he said the last time he saw Sabine, it was like about 10 o'clock, November 4th. It was election night, and she had left to go to a party celebrating the election. Well, she never showed up.
And she was very enthusiastic about President Obama's candidacy. So that was kind of a tip-off right then that something might be wrong.
In my experience, it's very rare for someone to disappear off the face of the earth and not come back within 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. And knowing that their car had been stolen and they were nowhere to be found, that's very quickly a situation that becomes suspicious.
Tasked with investigating Sabina's disappearance is Detective Peter Ramponi.
There's a lot of steps that have to be taken to establish that someone who is missing is indeed dead, and it's very difficult. We checked all of her credit cards, we checked airline flights, but there was no paper trail of her having done anything after 10 o'clock election night, November 4th.
Detective Ramponi impounds the car and calls in the forensic team.
There was evidence in the back of the car which indicated that something had happened. The back seat was cluttered with newspapers, and there was some Halloween stuff back there, and some kind of a stuffed bird thing laying in the back seat. When they moved the bird, we saw the hole. The seat cushion was cut out and the seat padding underneath of it, and it was like you could see the floor of the vehicle.
Investigators conduct a luminol test on the back seat.
Luminol, which you spray on it, and if it turns a certain color, like blue, then it's human blood.
It's definitive. There's blood all around the cutout patch in the back seat.
So they took DNA swabs from around that circular patch, both the inside of the patch and then around it, and then they sent that evidence off for DNA testing.
They also find drops of blood on the exterior rear left door.
We believed at that point, we felt pretty certain that she was dead. We just didn't know where.
A no-body homicide or a suspected murder, but with no body. These are cases that overwhelmingly point to that there is no other conclusion other than that someone has been murdered. And in the absence of a body, you really need to build that evidence through other means.
To find out what happened to Sabina Muehlbauer, detectives must unravel the last 24 hours of her life.
It's extremely important, especially when you have a whodunit kind of thing. You want to establish a timeline so that you can place people where they were or weren't during that period. And you go through and rule them out or add them in.
Their first suspect is the man caught driving Sabina's car in the early hours of November 6th, Robert Corona.
The first person you go after is the driver, because they're more culpable to being involved in a crime. So we decided to go back and talk to Mr. Corona.
The potential theory would have been that Sabine had somehow driven into the city of Bradenton, encountered Mr. Corona, that he had killed her and taken her car.
Corona had initially told them that Sabina had lent him the car to go buy drugs. It sounded plausible, but that was before they found the blood.
So he's confronted and he's told, look, this is basically a homicide investigation. You better be straight with us about how you came into possession of this car.
We said, hey, we think she's dead. Did you kill her? And he readily admitted that he stole the car at that point, that the drug thing was made up by him. And he immediately gave us another story, that he was checking cars behind the businesses. He found one at the Gator Lounge with a window open and the keys in it, how convenient, and drove away and got stopped, arrested.
In an attempt to verify Corona's story, detectives head to the Gator Lounge in Bradenton. They show the night bartenders a picture of Sabina and a picture of her car and ask if they've ever seen either before.
And they both said, no, we've never seen her before. And I asked about the camera in the back of the bar, and he said, it's fake. It's just there for looks. So we said, okay. But the bar manager did say that when she left after the bar closed, she saw Sabine's car parked in the southwest corner of the building, and it was just sitting there.
And that fit what Mr. Corona was saying.
So at that point, we pretty much eliminated Corona.
With Corona's account believed to be true, detectives are now able to narrow down the timeline of Sabina's disappearance.
The bar manager would have seen Sabine's car in the parking lot after 2:30, because that's when the bar was officially emptied, closed. Corona said he went through the parking lot, walking down the back of businesses, and that was the only car in the parking lot. And the time he got pulled over was just minutes after he took the car.
The fact that the bar manager sees the vehicle there in the early morning hours of the 6th tells the investigators that sometime between 10 and 11 p.m., when Cumber says he last saw her alive, and the time that her vehicle is first observed at the Gator Lounge, she's likely been killed.
With Corona ruled out, investigators are looking at just two main suspects.
One of the things you do when you have a homicide, the first thing you look at is the immediate circle of family and friends. And in this case, you know, Tom was there, Cumber was there, and really nobody else was there.
In cases where a female spouse is the victim of homicide, we logically think of intimate partners. And in this case, you know, you have the husband who's a business partner, and then we also have a current boyfriend with some potential motivation as well.
We got a lot of phone calls from friends of Sabine, and some people said, well, Tom did it, Tom did it. And, you know, other people were saying, Bill Cumber did it. So it's a mind game.
With little physical evidence to work with in the no-body homicide of Sabina Muehlbauer, detectives are looking at both her husband and her boyfriend as possible suspects. They start by interrogating her boyfriend.
Tom and Sabine had been married for years at the time of her disappearance. But the new element in her life was William Cumber.
Bill Cumber's 39 years old, and he's known as quite a charismatic guy around town. And, you know, some people would say he was a good-looking gentleman.
Mr. Cumber was very candid about his background. He said he had a history of getting angry at women and doing violent acts when scorned. He confessed to that and was convicted of that and went to prison for that.
But he insists that he's a changed man.
I haven't had any great episodes, but I used to have them a long time ago.
Okay.
But I've done things to train myself, to help my temper. I've been to classes. I quit drinking liquor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I only drink beer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do drugs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've got my mind focused on where I'm heading in life.
Mm-hmm.
Bill credits Sabina with giving him the new start he so desperately needed 3 years earlier.
Bill Cumber showed up at Haley's Motel one day, had told us a story of how he had just gotten out of prison and was looking for work. He said, I am coming from a difficult past where I have been in prison. I'm very handy with things. Is there anything I can do around your hotel for a little walk-in money? So he began to do little projects because they're very welcoming, you know, heartfelt people who saw a guy they wanted to help.
Bill tells detectives that what started as a friendship between Sabina and himself soon became something more.
He was a craftsman. He was an excellent woodworker. Saw some of the things he had made and were just astounding. And I believe he was an artist as well. So she was kind of receptive to those traits that this guy portrayed and possessed.
Bill's criminal past is viewed as suspicious, so investigators ask him for a detailed breakdown of the last day he spent with Sabina.
He said they had gone to the dentist in the afternoon, Sabine and Cumber, and she was paying for him to have some dental work done. And I think she left him for a time and then came back to the apartment on Magnolia Avenue where they had dinner. According to Mr. Cumber, that he made vegetarian spaghetti. She drank wine.
And everything was going good. You know, she was happy the boats were coming in with Obama. And I decided to step outside and smoke a cigarette. But she caught me coming in. She doesn't want me to smoke. She ain't gonna be around a smoker. She can't stand the smell of smoke. And she just decides to leave.
You see her drive away, or?
No, I don't go outside and chase her down or anything.
Okay, so she leaves. Around what time was it?
This was around 10:20 p.m., somewhere around there.
Mr. Cumber claimed that he had not spoken to Sabine since then. He had been attempting to reach her by phone several times.
Probably like 5-6 times.
Okay. And she never called you back?
No.
He then went over to Haley's Motel on the morning of the 5th to confer with Tom Buehler about her disappearance. Mr. Cumber claimed Tom Buehler had told him that Sabine sometimes just went off on her own and would reappear.
I said, well, you know, did you hear anything from her? You know, could you tell her to call me? And he goes, don't try and hunt her down. When she's ready to come back around, she'll come back around. So I took it at that.
He didn't seem upset. He didn't appear to be in any frantic hurry to help look for her.
Detectives subpoena Bill's phone records to see if he's telling the truth about trying to reach her.
There were no calls, nothing. After 10 o'clock on November 4th, there's no record of him calling anybody. And that's a big red flag.
While they can't rule Bill out, detectives struggle to find a reason why he might want Sabina dead.
She was taking care of him completely. She was renting the apartment, providing the food. She was the money person. And so that didn't really add up very well.
This relationship was serving many needs for Bill. He gets out of prison, he has nothing. He has somebody who's willing to cultivate a relationship with him and even financially support that relationship.
Mr. Cumber obviously was a suspect given his prior history, but police were never able to find any ultimate motive that established him as the perpetrator. He was losing a great deal with her being gone.
He's still on the list and we're watching, but evidence and interviews and situations took us in a different direction.
When asked who he thinks would want to hurt Sabina, Bill points the finger directly at her husband, Tom, insisting he was jealous of their relationship.
He has made threats in the past towards me about, you know, when he caught us sleeping together at the motel.
Love triangles are powder kegs. They are very unstable. You introduce jealousy, you introduce resentment, you introduce humiliation. And those can be powerful motivators for someone who needs to be in control.
Then, out of the blue, investigators get a call that a fire has broken out at Haley's Motel.
When the fire broke out at the hotel, it was such a second shock that immediately people believed that the two were related, her disappearance and the fire, and whether Tom maybe said it because the hotel was struggling.
Fire is always a great eradicator of evidence. That's why when it shows up in an unusual or suspicious circumstance, you always need to dig deeper in terms of, was the fire the main crime?
After a fire rages through Haley's motel, just 12 days after Sabina's disappearance, investigators hone in on her estranged husband, Tom.
To me, the obvious or intuitive reasoning behind why Tom may have burned down the hotel is obviously, number one, to potentially destroy evidence. Number two, we come back to money. Fires equal insurance settlements for the most part, and in this case, you could have that double whammy.
With heightened suspicions about Tom's involvement in Sabina's disappearance, detectives subpoena the motel's financial records.
There was some financial problems. The business wasn't doing that well, and Tom had a buyer from Europe, Germany to be specific, who was interested in buying the place. And with Sabine being gone, Tom gets all the money.
With money being a possible motive, detectives asked Tom whether or not he had taken out an insurance policy on Sabina's life.
Tom told one of my detectives that he has an insurance policy out on her for $100,000. Tom volunteered that. He forgot about the $300,000 policy he had taken out years before. And that concerned us as well.
Not only that, investigators discover that he recently filed court papers to have Sabina officially declared dead.
Insurance companies are obviously very meticulous about confirming death before paying out. And that's why proof of death is often necessary, and people who are after these types of settlements will ensure that there is that proof.
And as that played out, people started to dig up those possible feelings of, well, if they haven't found her, why would he want her declared dead at this point? You know, maybe there's still hope she's alive. This is kind of strange.
With their suspicions deepening, detectives question Tom about his whereabouts between 10 p.m. on November 4th and 2:30 a.m. November 6th, the window in which they believe Sabina was killed.
Tom said he was attending an election party and was there with his girlfriend, and there were several people that would have attested to his whereabouts during the time of her disappearance.
Alibis can be tricky in that just because you were at a certain place at a certain time doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't have also been somewhere else immediately thereafter and returned to the original place. We may be dealing with a large, as we are in this case, window of time where you had the opportunity to literally be in multiple places, not at once, but in immediate succession.
Detectives search Tom's house, looking for any evidence of foul play.
Tom had an injury on his head, small scratch, and we asked him about it. And he said, I was hanging some blinds in my bedroom, and when I was hanging them, they fell on me and struck me in the head. So he went and looked at the blinds, and they're kind of askew, and there's a little drop of blood on one of the blinds, which is consistent with the story he had told us. So he didn't hide it. You know, he told us right away where he got it.
And when the fire marshal tests Tom's hands for accelerant found in the motel's debris, they find nothing. Finally, detectives confront Tom about Bill's claim that he was jealous of his wife's extramarital relationship.
She felt madly in love with this guy. Okay? It dwarfs her thinking. It made me angry at first. You know, I just couldn't believe she would do this. And so it was there that I accepted everything that she had done. We didn't talk about Bill. I had told her, okay, you do what you need to do, but he's not going to be at the house, and he's not going to be at the motel.
I looked into it, some feelings.
Well, we did. You know, we were very close friends. We hopefully still are.
Tom said the romantic aspect of the relationship had ended years ago, but they remained friends and business associates.
They had the house divided. He lived in one half, she lived in the other. The kitchen was in the middle, that was neutral. They both stayed out of each other's way.
Tom had a girlfriend, so the idea that somehow he suddenly became enraged and jealous at this particular point didn't seem very likely.
But despite the fact that detectives aren't able to conclusively rule out Tom or Bill at this point, there just isn't enough evidence to charge either of them in Sabina's disappearance.
I only have heard of one case where they prosecuted somebody without a body and they got a conviction. And we really had to get a body.
The sheriff's office brings in cadaver dogs to search a section of the beach near Haley's motel.
We felt pretty certain she had been buried out at the beach somewhere. We started using dogs, ground-penetrating radar. Then we used a bulldozer, and we would scrape very little. And if they hit a branch or something, they'd stop. And we'd dig around it and find, oh, no, keep going. And we dug up a mile of beach, very wide, and went down as deep as you could.
But they come up empty-handed.
It got to a point where, no, nobody's dragging a body this far.
Then, a tip comes in.
There were 2 women who claimed to have seen someone who looked like Sabina at the airport.
There's cases of missing persons who go on vacation for, say, a month and don't tell anybody. And they come back from their vacation and everybody's wondering, where they've been. So it was raised as a distinct possibility. Could she have gone somewhere and not returned? Or maybe she'll show up?
But she would have had to use some form of money to survive on, and we couldn't find a trace of that.
There was no record of Sabine having taken any flight. Also, video camera footage from the airport was reviewed, and there was no image of Sabine at the airport at the time the women claimed to have seen her.
Tip lines are a double-edged sword. When the tips are screened properly and you have someone actually to follow up on them, they can be very good. Naturally, once they're set up, you're going to bring the cranks out of the woodwork. And a lot of these people will call in with well-intentioned tips, not knowing that they're just creating red herrings, but they can really bog down police departments. You can find yourself in a quicksand very, very quickly.
Yeah, there's some frustration, absolutely, but there was also determination. You have to chase every lead until you hit a wall. And then you go to the next lead and you're chasing that one until you gather enough information, or you hit a wall.
Detectives finally catch a break in the case when they get a call from a neighbor of Sabina's who lives on the beach.
They have a sidewalk which is just wide enough for, say, a golf cart to go down, and it runs parallel to the beach. There was a little jut of wooded area that came off that sidewalk towards the beach with trees, and the neighbor, he was out clearing out some stuff, and he moved some logs or debris, and he found a person there. He did open it and look, and it was Sabine's purse. But he had our ID and some, I guess, credit cards, a cell phone. Whoever disposed of it there had to know the area kind of to be on that walkway that's, only accessible by side streets. And this wasn't near a side street. It just made us think, well, I know who knows this area pretty well.
The discovery of Sabina's purse buried near the beach provides the first solid clue to who might be responsible for her murder.
Its location is critical because it's just a couple blocks down from Mr. Cumber's residence on Magnolia Avenue, and it just keeps pointing back to Mr. Cumber, that he is the person responsible.
With that in mind, detectives take a closer look at Bill's prison record.
A few years before, Mr. Cumber met a woman, felt that she had rejected him, and so he set fire to the residence that she was residing in at a time she and several other individuals were inside the house.
Now knowing that Bill's history includes an arson conviction, investigators question him directly about the fire at Haley's motel.
Fire marshal said there was an accelerant used. At some point, I believe the fire marshal spoke with Cumber They did some kind of test, and he had some kind of accelerant on his hands. And Cumber explained that away as at his workshop, his lock was stuck, and he sprayed WD-40 in there.
Mr. Cumber does allow them to search his apartment. They looked for any kind of gasoline containers. They examined the area of the apartment for traces of an accelerant, but they weren't able to find anything to definitively link him to the arson. But they find blood on the couch inside the apartment, which they then take swabs of and submit for DNA testing.
Then, detectives notice something else.
I noticed on his hand, he had a wound right in the center of his palm. And I asked him, I said, where did you get that? And he goes, oh, I was riding my bike and I skidded and I fell into the shells and I scraped my hand. Now, I've done that my entire life as a kid. You don't get a blister in the middle of your hand. That blister on his hand was from a shovel.
Detectives bring Cumber down to the station for a more serious sit-down. What they see solidifies their suspicions.
We had him come into the office, and Detective Alvarado and Detective Kenny interviewed him. I was watching on a video, and they questioned him for quite a while, and they asked him, what about the cut in the seat? Something to that effect, and he made an up and down motion like he was holding a knife and making a circle and cutting out the seat cover.
So for him to have made that gesture indicated he knew the shape that had been cut out of the seat.
I was watching the video, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's how the seat cover was taken out.
Mr. Cumber would have had no means of knowing that other than having been the person who cut out the piece of upholstery.
And in our minds then, boom, this is the guy who did it. Now we just have to prove it.
Detectives decide to force Bill into showing his hand.
Police will often bluff suspects by presenting them with claims of evidence that they don't actually have in hopes of getting an admission.
Detectives know that the camera at the back of the Gator Lounge, where Sabina's car was found, isn't functional. It's a fake, but Bill doesn't know that.
When we interviewed Cumber the next evening, we mentioned to him, well, there's a camera out behind the Gator Lounge. We haven't got the tape yet. And then when we do, we got to process it, which is nonsense. But whoever dropped that car off is going to be on that video.
That led Mr. Cumber to go to the Gator Lounge and confront the manager and ask, in fact, whether they had video cameras trained on the parking lot, which only a guilty person would have done. No innocent person would be concerned that he had appeared on a video. So that was one of the most telling aspects of the case that pointed to Mr. Cumber's guilt.
That was an indication that we're on the right track. You know, we got him. We just got to get him.
While investigators wait for the lab to process the blood found in Bill's apartment, they uncover an important clue.
November 4th, sometime after 10, Sabine's car had been parked out on the beach, a quarter of a mile away from the apartment she shared with William. And that raised concern. And the reason we found that out is because deputy was driving around that night and he saw the car parked in a no parking zone, and he wrote it a ticket.
The discovery helps illuminate Sabina's movements on the night she disappeared.
The timeline we had was Sabine's last known to be with Mr. Cumber between 10 and 11, according to his statement. Her car is documented 2 blocks away by the parking ticket at 5:10 a.m. on the 5th, so roughly 6 hours after he last said he'd been with her. Well, it's only 2 blocks away from where Mr. Cumber lives. It would make sense for him to want to place her car somewhere other than their residence if he's killed her. And then, of course, he can easily walk the distance back to his residence that evening.
It gave us a timeline, told us where the vehicle had been, as opposed to the Gator Lounge, and it just kind of all fit.
When detectives attempt to arrest Bill, they find that he's left town.
He was making a getaway, trying to disappear. Fleeing is kind of a good indicator of guilt.
As investigators zero in on Bill Cumber for the suspected homicide of Sabina Muehlbauer, he's apprehended, fleeing the state.
He's heading up north towards I-4, and he had a tail light out, and he shouldn't have been driving. He's got no license. And he's on probation. Well, normally a violation of probation, you may get a little bit of jail time, or you can get before a judge who finds out there's a murder investigation going on, and you can get 13, 14 years, which is what he got. So he's on ice.
That gave us all some breathing space to try to continue the investigation without having to worry that, he could potentially kill somebody else.
Meanwhile, the detectives finally get the forensic results from the blood taken from Sabina's car.
DNA is perhaps the most persuasive physical evidence you can have. We had Mr. Cumber's DNA on the driver's seat area and also in and around the area that had been cut out in the back seat, and we have Sabine's blood in the area that's been cut out. Keeping in mind that Mr. Cumber supposedly had never driven that car. So we decided we had all the evidence we were going to get. We were probably not going to find her body, and so ultimately the decision was made to charge Mr. Cumber with murder.
As they prepare their case against Bill Cumber, detectives put pressure on him to confess.
We hounded him for years and years. We just didn't let up, and he just was exhausted and knew he was going to be in jail for a long time, and he just gave up.
Today's date is October the 15th, 2015. Mr. Cumber has agreed to give us a statement concerning the death of Sabine Muehlbauer and give us information concerning the location of her body.
Cumber finally tells detectives exactly what happened to Sabina Muehlbauer in her last 24 hours.
She took him to the dental office for him to get some dental work done. And he was observed to be in ill temper. They then watched the election returns. She drank a bottle of wine, and somewhere in the area of 10 to 11, he tried to smoke a cigarette. She found out about it and basically told him it was over.
It wasn't just the smoking, it was the controlling issues that Tom was having on us. I didn't like that, I wasn't digging that, and she would side with him.
So Sabine's saying she can't go on with this anymore. What happens at that point?
I lose control. I hit her in the head, and then, I don't know, it's a disgusting situation, man.
And what do you do at that point?
I reached and grabbed her throat and started choking her out until she wasn't moving. I decided I didn't want to go back to prison.
He then wrapped her up in a blanket, put her in the back seat of the car, and he decided he was going to bury her out on the beach.
The following day, he takes the car, drives it into Bradenton. This is now November 5th, 2008. And he leaves it at the Gator Lounge with the keys in the ignition in the hopes that someone will take it and thus become the prime suspect in Miss Muehlbauer's disappearance. He takes the last bus back to the island and goes back to the apartment that they had shared. I don't think Mr. Cumber planned to kill her prior to the evening of November 4th. I believe he was angry at the loss of what she could provide for him financially. Having been denied something he wanted, he chose to kill her. However, to choke somebody to death requires a great deal of intent. It's not a split-second act like shooting a gun in the heat of the moment. It requires a sustained effort, which shows some intent to kill.
In exchange for a reduced sentence, Cumber agrees to reveal the location of Sabina's grave.
Mr. Cumber then got in a law enforcement vehicle and took the police to the location, which was a couple of blocks away from Haley's Motel, under a covered area where people can sit on a bench and look at the beach. He was somber. He kneeled down at the burial site, supposedly said a prayer. He affected remorse. Whether he actually felt it, I don't know.
Investigators begin digging for Sabina's remains.
We started finding items associated with Sabine roughly 3 feet down from the surface of the sand. Her clothing was with her. I believe a piece of jewelry was with her. The remains were completely skeletonized. I think finding the body provided the family with a measure of relief and certainty that they had lacked. I think ultimately this was something that gave them some peace of mind.
Bill is sentenced to 20 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole when he is 60 years old.
The timeline is important in all murder cases, but in this case, because she initially wasn't found, we had to come up with a convincing narrative, potentially to a jury, that in fact she is dead, and this is why we know she's dead. And the timeline was basically the critical aspect of that narrative.
But the victory is bittersweet.
You never forget the family members of the victims. You never forget their trauma. It's the ultimate act of violence, and it disturbs a family, typically, and in this case, it disturbed an entire community.
You got to weigh closure against sorrow and loss, you know? And that's a difficult thing to measure. For the family, can't ever really be closure. Because you wake up every day and you know they're gone.